The months Maiorum, the code that built Rome. At the heart of Rome's rise to greatness was not just its military strength, its political ingenuity, or even its wealth. It was something far older, deeper, and more fundamental, an unwritten code of honor, tradition, and duty. This was the months Maiorum, the way of the ancestors. For centuries, this code defined what it meant to be Roman. It governed how men fought, how politicians ruled, and how families were structured. It was not written in laws or carved into stone tablets. It was something that every Roman absorbed from birth, something ingrained into their identity. But there was one core belief above all: as long as Romans followed the months Maiorum, Rome would endure, and if they abandoned it, Rome would fall. Today, we look back on this ancient code and ask, was it the secret to Rome's success or the reason for its downfall? The months Maiorum was not just a philosophy. It was the foundation of Roman civilization. It was built on a set of key virtues that every citizen was expected to uphold. These were not abstract ideas, but deeply practical values that shaped daily life. 1. Fides. Loyalty and trust. Rome's strength was built on unbreakable bonds of trust between soldiers, between citizens, and between Rome and its gods. A Roman's word was his oath. To betray a friend, a commander, or the state was to become something worse than an enemy, a traitor. Cincinnatus, the Roman farmer who was given absolute power as dictator to save Rome from invasion, is the ultimate example of fides. Once the crisis was over, he willingly gave up power and returned to his farm, because that was the Roman way. In war, Roman generals would rather die with their men than betray their duty. To break trust was to bring dishonor upon one's name, one's family, and one's city. Yet, as Rome grew, loyalty became a commodity, something to be bought, sold, and negotiated. Generals no longer served Rome, they served their own ambitions. 2. Pietas. Duty to family, gods, and the state. Pietas was more than religious devotion. It was a sense of responsibility to one's family, ancestors, and country. Aeneas, the legendary founder of Rome, was said to have carried his father on his back while fleeing Troy, symbolizing his duty to family before himself. Roman soldiers saw their service not as personal ambition, but as a duty to the gods and the city. Yet, as Rome's elite grew wealthier and more corrupt, pietas faded. Politicians no longer acted out of duty, but out of self-interest. Generals waged war for their own glory, not for Rome. Rome's fall did not come from a single battle or invasion. It came when its leaders put themselves before their city. 3. Religio occultus. The sacred relationship with the gods. The Romans believed they were favored by the gods, but this favor was not unconditional. They had to maintain the rituals, uphold the traditions, and honor their ancestors. Every military campaign began with sacrifices and omens. If the gods did not approve, the campaign was delayed, or even abandoned. The Vestal Virgins, priestesses who kept Rome's sacred fire burning, were seen as the spiritual guardians of the city. If they failed in their duty, Rome itself was believed to be in danger. Yet, as Rome expanded and absorbed foreign cultures, its religious traditions became more political than sacred. The Senate manipulated omens to justify wars, and emperors declared themselves gods, twisting religion into a tool for power. By the time of the empire's collapse, many Romans believed the gods had abandoned them. But had the gods left Rome, or had Rome left its gods? 4. Disciplina. The backbone of the Roman army. No army in history was more feared than Rome's legions. Their success was not just due to superior weapons or tactics. It was because of disciplina. Roman soldiers were trained to endure anything: hunger, exhaustion, and death itself. The punishment for cowardice or disobedience was decimation, the execution of 1 in every 10 men. Victories were never personal. They belonged to Rome, not the general who won them. But over time, Rome's armies became political pawns. Soldiers fought for money rather than honor. Legions became loyal to generals, not the Senate. In the final days of the empire, Rome's own armies sold the throne to the highest bidder, and discipline became a memory. 5. Virtus. The Roman ideal of masculinity. Virtus was more than bravery. It was a standard for Roman manhood. To show fear in battle was unthinkable. Even in defeat, a Roman was expected to fight to the death. Political leaders were supposed to be models of strength, wisdom, and self-control. Yet, as Rome grew wealthier, virtus was replaced with luxury, greed, and excess. Emperors like Nero and Caligula abandoned discipline for indulgence. The Senate, once filled with men of honor, became a nest of bribery, deceit, and betrayal. When Virtus died, so too did the Republic. The months Maiorum made Rome the most powerful civilization on Earth. It created unmatched loyalty, an unbeatable army, and a culture that demanded honor and discipline. But when Rome stopped living by its own code, the cracks began to show. Generals stopped fighting for the Republic and started fighting for themselves. Politicians no longer cared about the people, they cared about power. The army, once disciplined, became corrupt. The gods, once revered, were ignored or used as propaganda. By the time Rome fell, the months Maiorum was a memory, and with it, the empire that once ruled the world crumbled into dust. Rome's story is not just history, it is a warning. Every great empire believes itself to be eternal. Every civilization assumes it will never fall. But Rome's collapse was not sudden. It was a slow decay, caused not by enemies at the gates, but by the abandonment of its own values. The question is history repeating itself? Because in the end, Rome didn't die in battle. It died when it stopped being Roman. Corruption and decline. How Rome betrayed its own ideals. The Roman Republic was built on sacrifice, duty, and the unshakable belief in service to the state. For centuries, it was a system where citizens fought not for personal wealth, but for Rome itself. Politicians were expected to serve, not rule. Generals were expected to win wars for the Republic, not themselves. But something changed. By the late Republic, Rome was no longer the humble city of disciplined soldiers and dutiful senators. It had become a battlefield for the rich and powerful, a place where the old values of honor and sacrifice were drowned in greed and ambition. The same republic that had conquered the world was now eating itself from within. The months Maiorum, the very foundation of Rome, was being traded away, piece by piece. How did this happen? How did the greatest republic in history become a playground for corruption? The answer lies in war, wealth, and ambition. In the early days, Rome had been a city of soldiers and farmers. Victory in war meant land for the people, a stronger republic, and glory for Rome. But when Rome expanded eastward, defeating Macedonia, Greece, and the rich kingdoms of Asia Minor, it suddenly found itself drowning in wealth. The influx of gold, slaves, and luxury goods transformed Rome's economy and its values. Land-owning farmers were pushed out. As wealthy elites bought massive estates worked by slaves, small Roman farmers lost their way of life. The Senate became a den of corruption. Eager to profit from the new wealth, senators cut deals with foreign kings, sold political favors, and used bribes to win elections. The military became professionalized. Instead of citizen soldiers fighting for Rome, armies became loyal to the generals who paid them. The Republic was still standing, but its foundation was cracking. And soon, those cracks would break wide open. For centuries, Carthage had been Rome's greatest enemy. The wars between them had defined generations, and every Roman feared what would happen if Carthage won. Then, in 146 BC, Rome wiped Carthage off the map. It was total destruction. The city was burned. Its people were either killed or enslaved, and the land was famously sown with salt to prevent future growth. Rome had won, but without an external enemy to unite them, Romans turned on each other. The Senate, once focused on defending Rome, descended into personal rivalries. With no great foreign threat, politicians fought each other instead of Rome's enemies. The military, once loyal to Rome, became loyal to the highest bidder. The Republic had been built in the fires of war, but now, those fires were consuming Rome itself. The first major cracks in the Republic came in the form of power-hungry generals and ambitious politicians who no longer fought for Rome, but for themselves. 1. Marius and Sulla, the First Civil War. By the late 2nd century BC, two men redefined Roman politics: Gaius Marius, a populist leader, and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a ruthless aristocrat. Marius reformed the army, allowing the poor to serve as soldiers, but in doing so, he created an army loyal to generals, not the Senate. Sulla took this further. After defeating Marius in a brutal civil war, he marched his own legions into Rome. The first time a Roman army had attacked its own city. Sulla declared himself dictator, executed thousands of political enemies, and then retired, believing he had saved Rome. But Rome had changed forever. Once one general had seized power through force, others would follow. 2. Populism versus elitism. The Gracchi and the battle for Rome's soul. The Republic had always been a delicate balance between the Senate, the elites, and the people. But by the 2nd century BC, the gap between rich and poor was unbearable. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, two brothers, tried to pass reforms to give land back to the poor. The Senate, fearing they would lose power, murdered them both. Rome had set a new precedent. Political problems would now be solved with violence. From this moment on, assassinations, riots, and military coups became the new way to gain power in Rome. 3. Julius Caesar, the man who embodied and destroyed the months Maiorum. Caesar is one of history's most paradoxical figures. He was both the ultimate Roman, brilliant, disciplined, loyal to his men, and the man who finally ended the Republic. He expanded Rome's borders more than anyone before him, embodying virtues and discipline. He was beloved by the people, acting as a champion of the lower classes, a modern-day Gracchus, but his ambition led him to cross the Rubicon, march on Rome, and declare himself dictator for life. Caesar became Rome's king in all but name, and his assassination in 44 BC was the final attempt to save the Republic, but by then, it was already dead. By the end of the Republic, elections were meaningless, corruption was rampant, and military force had replaced political debate. The Senate no longer represented the people. It was a tool for the wealthy. Generals no longer fought for Rome. They fought for their own power. The months Maiorum was no longer respected. It was a memory. The old ways were gone, and in their place, a new Rome was rising. A Rome ruled by warlords, emperors, and absolute power. Looking back, it's easy to wonder, was there ever a moment when Rome could have stopped its own destruction? If the Senate had listened to the Gracchi, if Marius and Sulla had stepped aside, if Caesar had refused dictatorship, could the Republic have been saved? Or was Rome's fall inevitable, because when a nation abandons its core values, its fate is already sealed? The Republic was dead, and in its place, a new power was rising. A power built not on tradition, but on war. Civil war and the death of the Republic. Rome had once been a city of laws, tradition, and shared power, but by the late Republic, those ideals were dead. The months Maiorum, the sacred code that had guided Rome for centuries, was now nothing more than a relic. Power belonged not to the Senate, more to the people, but to the strongest army. And the men who commanded those armies: Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, Mark Antony, Octavian. They had been Rome's finest generals, its most skilled politicians, and, ironically, its greatest enemies. Each of them claimed to fight for Rome, but in the end, they fought only for themselves. How did these legendary figures, once protectors of the Republic, become the instruments of its destruction? And in the end, did Rome truly fall, or was its transformation into an empire inevitable? The Senate had ruled Rome for centuries, but by the late Republic, it had become its own worst enemy. It was corrupt, bribery determined elections, and money spoke louder than merit. It was weak. It relied on powerful generals to maintain order but feared their growing influence. It was divided. Senators no longer fought for the Republic but for personal gain. When Julius Caesar rose to power, he exposed these flaws like never before. He was a general, a statesman, and, most importantly, a man who knew how to command loyalty. Unlike the Senate, Caesar understood the people. He spoke to them, won their trust, and used that trust to build an unstoppable force. The Senate had to choose: accept Caesar's rise or destroy him. They chose war. For a time, Rome had balanced its power between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Both were heroes. Both commanded legions. But when the Senate demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome, he knew what it meant. Obedience meant death. Defiance meant war. And so, on January 10, 49 BC, Caesar made his choice. He led his army across the Rubicon River, declaring war on the Senate itself. The Republic's last days had begun. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, now became his greatest rival. The Senate, which had relied on Pompey for protection, fled Rome in panic. The Roman people watched as their city became a battlefield. The two greatest generals of their time clashed across the empire, but in the end, Pompey was defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. He fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, only to be betrayed and assassinated. Caesar had won, and yet, the war was far from over. With Pompey dead, Caesar was Rome's undisputed master. He was named dictator for life, a title that sent shockwaves through the Republic. Some saw him as a savior, a man who could restore order. Others saw him as a king in all but name. And in Rome, kings did not last long. On March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, men who claimed to fight for the Republic, took matters into their own hands. In the halls of the Senate, they struck over 20 stab wounds. A legend cut down by his own people. Caesar was dead. The Republic should have been saved. Instead, his murder only sealed its fate. The assassins had thought they were liberating Rome, but they had miscalculated. The people did not rejoice. They mourned. Julius Caesar had not just been a dictator, he had been a symbol of Rome's strength. His death left a power vacuum, one that would be filled by his greatest supporters. Two men rose to claim Caesar's legacy: Mark Antony and Octavian. Mark Antony, Caesar's closest ally, a brilliant general, and a man hungry for power. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, young, ruthless, and more cunning than anyone realized. The Senate, hoping to restore the Republic, backed Brutus and Cassius, but they were fighting a losing battle. At Philippi in 42 BC, their armies were crushed. The last defenders of the Republic were dead. Now, the real battle for Rome began. For years, Antony and Octavian ruled together, but Rome was not big enough for two masters. Their alliance crumbled, and the empire split. Antony controlled the east. Octavian ruled the west. Antony, seduced by Cleopatra, aligned himself with Egypt. Octavian, ever the politician, painted Antony as a traitor to Rome. In 31 BC, the two forces met at Actium, one of the most decisive battles in Roman history. Octavian's fleet crushed Antony's navy. Antony and Cleopatra fled, knowing all was lost. 1 year later, they both took their own lives. The war was over. The Republic was gone. Rome now had an emperor. Octavian stood alone. He had defeated his enemies, avenged Caesar, and taken absolute control of Rome. But he was no fool. He knew that openly declaring himself emperor would invite rebellion. So, he played the game. He kept the illusion of a republic, allowing the Senate to exist, but only as a shadow of its former self. He called himself Princeps, first citizen rather than king. He took a new name, Augustus, to first emperor of Rome. And with that, the Roman Republic was no more. It had died not with a single event, but with a series of betrayals, wars, and political maneuverings that stretched over decades. Some say Augustus saved Rome, bringing stability after years of chaos. Others say he buried the Republic for good. But one thing was certain: Rome would never be the same again. Looking back, it's easy to wonder, could the Republic have been saved? Could a system built on tradition, debate, and compromise have survived in a world of ambition and greed? Or was the Republic always doomed to fall? Because when power stops belonging to the people, it is only a matter of time before it belongs to an emperor. And in Rome, that time had come. Rome's legacy, a lesson for the modern world. Every great civilization follows the same path. First, it rises, driven by ambition, discipline, and a strong identity. Then, it flourishes, expanding in power, influence, and wealth. But eventually, something changes. Corruption sets in. Society grows complacent. Wealth replaces duty. The people become divided. And then, it collapses. Rome was not the first empire to fall, nor was it the last. But its story is different. Rome did not disappear overnight. It decayed from within. And for centuries, it pretended everything was fine, right up until the moment it wasn't. This is not just a history lesson. It is a warning. Because if Rome, with all its power, culture, and military strength, could fall, what does that say about the world today? Have we, too, begun the final chapter? When people imagine the fall of Rome, they often picture barbarian invasions, burning cities, and dramatic battles. But Rome's real fall happened long before the city was sacked in 476 AD. For centuries, Rome masked its decline with distractions, grand spectacles, imperial propaganda, and economic illusions. The empire looked strong on the outside, but beneath the surface, its foundations were rotting. The Senate became irrelevant, emperors ruled with absolute power, and political debate was a thing of the past. The economy crumbled. Once self-sufficient, Rome now relied on slave labor, foreign imports, and massive government spending. The military weakened. Roman legions, once feared across the world, now depended on mercenaries who had no loyalty to Rome. Morality eroded. The old values of discipline, sacrifice, and duty were replaced by excess, pleasure, and personal ambition. The greatest irony: most Romans didn't see it happening. To them, life went on. The empire still looked powerful. The cities were still grand. The games in the Colosseum were still spectacular, but the truth was clear. Rome was dying. For centuries, Rome's strength came from its unwritten code, the months Maiorum. It was the foundation of Roman culture, the guidebook for how Romans should live. But over time, these values were abandoned. Fides loyalty. Once, a Roman's word was sacred. By the empire's end, alliances were temporary, and betrayal was common. Pietas duty to family and state. Once, Romans served the Republic selflessly. In the later years, public office was just another way to get rich. Discipline, a military discipline. Once, the legions were Rome's backbone. By the end, they were undisciplined, corrupt, and filled with foreign mercenaries. Virtues, manly excellence. Once, strength and honor were everything. In the later years, emperors like Nero and Commodus lived in luxury, while Rome crumbled. Without the months Maiorum, Rome lost its identity. And when a civilization forgets what made it strong, collapse is only a matter of time. The decline of Rome is not just history, it is a pattern. And the more we look at our world today, the more uncomfortable the similarities become. 1. The rise of corruption and elitism. In the last days of Rome, the political class stopped serving the people. Senators and emperors focused only on their own wealth and power, ignoring the needs of ordinary citizens. Do we not see the same today? Politics has become a game of power, not service. The rich grow richer, while the gap between the elite and the common people grows wider. Just like in Rome, trust in leadership is at an all-time low. 2. Economic collapse and inflation. Rome was once the richest empire in the world, but by the late empire, its economy was falling apart. The government spent beyond its means, inflation skyrocketed, and the currency lost value. Today, we see economic crises, debt bubbles, and inflation affecting nations worldwide. Are we repeating Rome's mistakes, spending beyond our means while ignoring the consequences? 3. Military overstretch and decline. At its height, Rome had the greatest army in the world, but by the end, it relied on mercenaries, divided loyalties, and stretched resources. When the real threats came, the legions were too weak to respond. Are modern superpowers making the same mistake? Are today's armies spread too thin, fighting endless wars, while domestic issues are ignored? 4. The decline of traditional values. As Rome fell, entertainment and excess replaced discipline and responsibility. Gladiator games distracted the people, while emperors indulged in luxury and personal pleasure. Look at today's world. Are we too obsessed with entertainment, celebrity culture, and pleasure-seeking while ignoring the real problems? Have we, like the Romans, become too comfortable to notice the decay around us? This is the ultimate question. Was Rome's fall a choice, or was it destined to happen? Some argue that all civilizations must decline, that growth leads to excess, and excess leads to collapse, that no empire can last forever. But others argue that Rome fell because it lost sight of what made it great. If Romans had upheld the months Maiorum, if they had maintained discipline, honor, and duty, could the empire have survived? And if that is true for Rome, is it true for us? If a Roman from the days of Cincinnatus, Scipio Africanus, or even Julius Caesar could see the modern world, what would they think? Would they admire our technology, our cities, and our achievements? Or would they see a civilization on the edge, a people who have forgotten what made them strong, just as Rome once did? Would they see in us the early republic, full of ambition, discipline, and honor? Or would they see in us the late empire, corrupt, distracted, and blind to its own decline? Perhaps history is not just a record of the past. Perhaps it is a mirror. Rome's story is not just about an empire that fell. It is about the choices that led to its fall. It is a reminder that no civilization, no matter how powerful, is invincible, that no empire is too strong to crumble, that the greatest enemy is often not outside the gates, but within. And so we must ask ourselves, are we Rome? And if we are, what will we do differently? Because history does not repeat itself, but it does warn those who are willing to listen.